Okay. So, everyone, I want to welcome everybody. I want to first, as always, introduce Jim Tuman. This is Jimmy's show. This is Jimmy's legacy. Um, Before we start, I want to say a few things in every time we do this about Jim, who has dedicated his entire life to helping people. So, to me, when we live in a world of social media where people have these millions and millions of followers. To me, someone like Jim deserves so much accolade for what he's done. He has spoken to millions of kids around the world. He has saved so many lives. And again, I always say that there are so many people who never knew or still don't know and may never know that Jim's impact on their children and their lives was so important, and it helped not only save lives but shape people's lives. So I think that his knowledge and experience in this space of what we all go through in this life to go through it is seamless and as painless as possible. But as everybody knows, there's always bumps in the road. There's always things that aren't expected that take people down a different path. But it's always about keeping that state of mental health and mindset that everything's going to be okay. So Jimmy, um, first of all, my hat's off to you. I appreciate everything that you've done over the course of your career, and now coming up to almost 80 years young. It's just been an honor and a pleasure to be around you for several decades now, and your impact on people. And I think that this right here is a way for us to continue that legacy for a long time, for people to understand what you've done, from Jimmy's Kids that's given away toys to children in inner cities, to I would say hundreds of thousands of children that would never have gotten anything over Christmas, and you've done that. So your dedication to people and the human race is just unparalleled. So thank you for your time and your effort and your energy into doing what you've done.
Well, Roy, I can't thank you enough, and thank you all for, watching today, and a happy St. Pat's, and, hope that, you've had a lot of fun today. Um, this particular topic, um, my backstory to it is when I was 15 years old, I had planned on taking my life. And I had the plan already prepared, and my best friend knocked on my window at midnight and said, "I love you. I would be lost without you. Don't do it." And sometimes I have learned in my journey that it just takes that. I had a I had a young girl, a middle school girl, once call me up and say, "If somebody smiles at me today, I won't take my life." Suicide is now the number one killer of kids. How it soared into this ranking is just incredible. And I've watched it. I've spoke to more than 2 million kids in more than 2,000 schools in every state and 11 foreign countries. And again, the mission was to have kids see their value and be able to make decisions that don't require taking their lives. Because taking their lives means it, you can't come back. It's a final act. And we can't understand in that final act And so often, so many people, and especially at schools, when somebody at school takes their life, kids do a group mourning. And kids will say, he was such a good guy. I really liked him. I really, I'm sorry he took his life. Meanwhile, that same kid who's saying that may have bullied him, may have picked on him, may have put him down. And that is the sad part of what suicide is all about. And suicide is not an isolated act. It affects families, communities. It affects, churches and temples, and people not only just mourn, but have this attachment to the loss of a child. And when we understand this particular drama, we realize that it is not just a singular situation. However, today, in the climate that we have, in the mass shootings, because I've been working with that for a very long time, we have a climate out there that's contentious, that there's anger, and people blame, and it creates all of this, drama that kids see. And kids see this hopelessness, and they don't want to go on.
Well, let me ask you a quick question, Jimmy.
Of course.
You said something about the kid that was picking on him, and then later saying, what a great kid he was. And, listen, being a boy, right, and a guy, and, growing up with a, bunch of different friends, boys always, right, bust each other's chops. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, even at my age now, it's like, we're always constantly, giving each other little things. Do you think that this generation is a little bit different, where they just don't have the thick skin to realize that sometimes, when people do this, it's kind of like an affectionate way for guys, right, to like bust somebody's chops over something? Do you think that they're just so sensitive today that, that it's just, it's a little too much?
It used to be, Roy, that was more the norm, where people teased each other and busted their chops and did, the things that you've just shared. However, today, what is happening is, it used to be, I'll give the perfect example for you. It used to be that you could call somebody fat in school, and they would, they would be offended. They, would be challenged and everything, but it never got to the extreme of saying, now I don't want to live. And obviously, posting stuff on social media and all of the issues around that have created this. And kids are taking their lives over things that many of us would have just let go, or for the moment felt badly about it. And now it spins in their head. I'm fat. I'm never going to be accepted. I'm never going to have friends. I'm never going to have, a boyfriend or girlfriend. All of that spins in people's heads. And unfortunately, when it's spinning in your head, it's a 24/7 drama. And then kids wind up, thinking there's nothing left for me. There is this ending, this hopelessness. So yes, the climate has changed. And yes, because of people's, anger at each other and all of the thing. Well, let me share something with you just to give you a concept of this. First of all, over COVID, families were, they were isolated, and kids were isolated. And if the family wasn't intact in terms of, the caring and the atmosphere that they were raising their children, what would happen is that it magnified all of the issues that the family was dealing with. So if a kid came home and his parents were always fighting with each other, and there was a lot of rage in the family, when COVID came, it just magnified that. But let's presume it was even a normal situation. When kids come home where parents are not getting along, kids invariably embrace it, and they internalize it. And many times a kid will say in his head, it's because of me. I'm the cause here. And a lot of times parents, will tell a kid they're the cause. And many times parents will say, and I've talked to maybe 750,000 parents over the course of my career. And I say to parents, there's one phrase not to say out loud to your kid. And that phrase is, if you don't like it here, go someplace else. And most parents don't want their kid on the street. They don't want their kid running away. They don't want their kid, where they don't know where the kid is. And because of all of the things that are happening now, we are living in a different type of atmosphere. And we have to look at different ways to be able to support kids. I'll give you another perfect example. And I'll ask you, Roy, I'm sure that you'll get this, but where do you think is the loneliest time of a day in school for a kid?
Lunchtime.
Absolutely. When a kid is sitting by themselves in a large lunchroom with their peers, they're perceived as a loser. They're perceived like they have no friends. They're perceived like they're worthless. And I've known for so long how many kids, will take their lives because of this.
Well, but one thing too, Jimmy, though, is that what I've noticed is this, obviously I have nieces and nephews and my own children. And I noticed today, I actually had friends in town, and their daughter's getting engaged, so they went to surprise, and the three kids were here, and at certain times, and they're very well adjusted kids, great family, they're sitting on their phones for 30, 40 minutes, an hour, just by themselves on the phone. And it's like the whole family's there, and you have this there's so much to do. There's the pool, and we've got all these activities, right? Boating. And it's like, they're literally sitting on their phones for hours. It's like they're just consumed by this phone.
Do you know why they do it? Because the most challenging thing for a kid is to not be accepted. And the phone is the vehicle of connection, of a degree of acceptance. And unfortunately, these kids, utilize anything. They count the number on Facebook of their friends. They are challenged by the fact that, sometimes they don't have enough people in their life to care about them. I mean, this has become consuming. And as social media has ramped, this consumption is getting greater, and kids cannot, it's tough for them to say, I'm alone. And that is probably the most difficult challenge of a kid's life. So the phone is their connection. And the more kids that call them, the more friends they have, the better they say their life is and how they feel about themselves. But for so many, there will never be enough friends. But
Well,
in the school, I had started around the country a program called Lunchtime Connections. And what I wanted the school to do was round up these kids who were isolated and do board games or discussion groups or watch videos or do something so that they were not perceived as loners. And one of the challenges, and it's lapped over to school shootings. If you notice, and after Columbine, a reporter asked me, Jim, is this going to be a one and done? Now, Columbine was pretty much the first of the school shootings. And I said, no, I said, this is going to be a continuum, and it's going to build momentum. And even as I was saying it, I was wishing that it wouldn't come to that.
okay, but, so here's my question to you then. If the family structure is broken down, which it is, right? You have a 56%, 57% divorce rate. So the fighting that you're talking about is for sure there. Okay. So then if you take that number and you take 20% more who probably don't want to be married and they're still stuck there, maybe they can't get divorced because of financial reasons, whatever. So now you're at 77%. So these kids, are in these households that aren't the greatest of households, right? But the question is, even if you go back into the days when I was a kid, my parents, they've been married now, I don't know, they're going on 60 years, but they still had a ton of rough roads going through. Anybody who's been married knows that there's a lot of rough times in it, right? Why is it that everybody's just getting so soft about all of these things instead of just having thick skin about it and saying it's okay, right? The friends are going to come, because to me it's like, I don't know if they're going to get it from the home anymore. I don't know if they're going to get that kind of nurturing and support from the home, like a parent saying, hey, you know what, buddy, sometimes these kids are going to be this way. Sometimes kids are going to do these things. And you're just going to have to, suck up, but, it's okay. It will be okay. And if the parents don't have that communication with them, I think that this is why this forum is so important, because we need to tell these kids that there is outlets, right? It's not just about having the conversation about, it's like, what can you implement? Like you said, that lunchroom program. There needs to be people, and here's the way that I always looked at it. People always ask me about certain problems, and I said, I can solve any problem there is. And I meant it. And the reason was because the sheer problem with the problem was the numbers. The numbers are on our side. What that means is if there's 300 million Americans, 337 million Americans, and let's just say, how many suicides are there a year from these kids?
Hundreds of thousands now.
Okay. So the number for 337 million to a few hundred thousand is a huge gap. People need to be involved. It doesn't need to be your kid. Like I always said this to myself when I'm driving down the street, like, I was in Fort Lauderdale the other day and I was driving and this girl was going down the street and I knew she was drunk and this guy was there, like, trying to help her. And I turned my car around. So my wife's in the car. She's like, what are you doing? I says, I got to make sure that she knows this guy and that they know each other and what's going on. People have to get involved. Because the minute you have a Jim Tuman, you're an icon, but it's like that needs to trickle down. It needs to trickle down to where there are people, and that's kind of when I decided with this was like, well, wait a minute. Jimmy's going to be 80 years old, right? How much time can he devote to doing this? And how much energy does he have? But there's parents that are out there. They should be involved. There's other students who should be involved. There's student athletes who should be involved. The teachers, the community, they need to be involved because not every family has the resources to do it. And what I mean by that is, some parents may not have the facility, the faculties to do it. Perfect example, my mom was 16 years old when she had my brother. At that time, she had no experience or knowledge how to raise a child because she still was a child, right? So you have to have a community that's involved. And I guess my question to you is, how do you implement that to work?
Great question. I've been working with a family now for some time whose 6-year-old daughter committed suicide. And kids were picking on her at school. She went home and told her parents. Her parents said, when we were in school, we want you to tough it up. When we were in school, you're not going to tell us you're sick. You're not going to stay home. And the teasing kept going and the picking on her kept going. And the more she went to her parents, the more her parents said, look, we're not going to let you stay home. What they were doing, and this is a process that you've got to share with people, but what they were doing was they were denying this little girl's cry for help and saying, when it didn't happen in our school, therefore today it's not happening in your school. And she climbed in the family car, pulled down the garage door, started the car. She was a latchkey kid for 5 minutes. She started the car and sat there until she died. 6 years old. Now, people always come to me. I have younger than 6 that I've worked with. 6 years old. People are asking me, how does she know how to do this?
Yeah.
Internet.
Yeah.
They're sponges.
Okay. So here's my question, Jimmy. What should those parents have actually done? Should they have gone to the teacher and said, hey, what's going on? Should the teacher, how did anybody in the school not know that this is going on?
Because kids are adept at masking. They know what to say. They know what to do. If they come in the house and they run up and spend hours on their computer, parents they're not attuned to this. And it's really important that parents really get to, comprehend, because I've been following the Oxford school parents who were just indicted for, giving a gun to their son, who killed 4 students. And these are parents that, had no clue. And parents, it doesn't come with an owner's manual. Parents, have to continue to dialogue with their kids and to be able to understand their kids and to be able to listen to their kids. But the most important ingredient in a home is a kid has to feel safe, that they can open up and talk to their parents. Most kids don't feel safe. And a lot of times, and I was one of those kids, in my family, love was based on performance.
Okay, but hold on. When you say feel safe, Okay, I just hung up before our call with a guy who is, I think I introduced you to him. He's building the largest home in America right now, 100,000 square foot or 110,000 square foot home, and his daughter had committed suicide.
I remember you had me talk to him.
That's right. And so here's a guy. He's building a 110,000 square foot home. Wonderful guy. I mean, fantastic guy. And it's like, well, when you say safe, you kind of got to be more specific on safe, because he's a nice guy.
Means what happened when I talked to him was he said, now that, you know, my daughter was my most precious gift, and now my daughter is gone, and I don't know whether I have the wherewithal to continue to build this home, because, you know, my daughter was the most important person in my life. Now, I would have a feeling as he was talking to me that one of the more important things in his life over his daughter was his home, and the size of his home, and all of the things that it meant, the hours and hours and hours of doing, you know, creating this incredible place. He in turn denied his daughter, because one of the key things that, and there's been great experiences I've saw with parents, and a lot of parents, when they talk to me about how to be able to be a better parent, is they can be in the middle of something that is really important to them, and they stop and they sit and they put their kid on, a young child, and they listen to their kid, or they play with their kid. And that is so important at this time in our history, when we are so busy and we don't create a priority. And a priority is your child. Because I have watched so many parents over the years be consumed with their careers and be consumed with their lives, that their children get lost in never land, because the parent, doesn't give them the understanding and the time. And after a while, Roy, if you have, I call it best friends. It's part of my keynote. And best friends, I ask my audiences, raise your hand if you have a best friend. Now tell me what that best friend is all about. And people will say to me, they're there when I need them. They make me laugh. They help me through any type of situation. They're people that I know I can 100% count on. And I'll ask then the people who put their hands up, and it's usually the whole audience. I'll ask, why didn't you say the car that person drove, the job that they had, the money that they did or didn't do, the size of your house? And they will say openly, it's not important. And I'll say to them, but why do we believe that it is so important?
Oh, it's important because that's the emphasis that people have put on every aspect of, since you go back to kings and emperors,
Of course.
So our society's not going to get away from that. It's kind of like with women and having fashion magazines, and so it's not going to go anywhere. So the way that I look at it is that you kind of, right, there's no book on being a parent. There's no book.
Doesn't come with an owner's manual.
That's right. So here's the way I look at it. So the first takeaway from our conversation today is you said that no kid should eat lunch alone. So I think that we should build an app that helps kids reach out to other kids just for this purpose of connecting.
I've got one step better for you. A kid in Chicago developed an app.
Oh, good.
And because of that, because of, a kid, who understood kids, that app is really, creating and probably saving some lives.
Perfect. So now let's go to the next phase. So now not only can the kids and the students connect, but also the community can connect. I saw this thing the other day where there was this group of dads and the school was just an absolute disaster, constant fighting. And then these 10 huge dads went into the school every day. They went there every morning and then they went there for lunch, and it's completely transformed the school. 10 men changed the entire trajectory of this entire school with thousands of kids. So it takes 10. So my point is that if the app can be done where the parents can get involved as well as the students, because I know when I was young, like even when I took my son with you to drop off turkeys in Detroit, my son would always say, we would get to the place and the people would say, well, where are you from? And we'd say, we were just told to bring the turkeys here. That's all. We're just delivering them. And my son would always say, why do you say that? And I told him, we do it because this is what we should do, not because we need the accolades to go with it. Then, so that's important. And number two is the second takeaway that I get from what you're saying is the parents that don't know how to communicate with their kids well. If the second part of the app says a parent sees the kids coming home and says that they're being picked on and bullied on, and people are interjecting, students as well as parents are interjecting, because these people are all out of their minds, right? They want to post about a dinner or being at the St. Patty's thing today, right? And like, oh, look at the great time we're having. And, I get friends sending me stuff. And it's like, okay, great. How is this not more important where you're sending stuff saying to somebody, okay, listen, I know your kid did this, but here's what you should do, right? And here's what you should say. And here's how you should help. I think that if there's people who are involved and then this app goes to the second phase is where parents can come and ask questions to other parents.
When I did my parent program, and this was after my assembly, for those of you who don't know, is very emotional. Kids come to the mic and talk about their deepest pain. And I bring them back at night. And I bring the parents. There's usually a big parent group. And I will start with handing out a 3x5 card and saying to the parents, what's your greatest fear of the parent of a teenager? And usually it's, I'm going to lose my child to drugs and alcohol. And so I would go to the kids and I would say, your parents think that, their greatest fear is that they're going to lose you to drugs and alcohol. What can you tell them to make them feel safer? And the kids will say, you got to trust me. You got to trust me. You supposedly brought me up and you got to trust me. So then I'd go to the parents and I would say, they're saying that you got to trust them. And the parents then retort back to the kids, well, I know what happened when I was growing up, and I know that you're probably going to pull the same thing. So then I'd go back to the kids and I'd ask the kids, what did you feel that the parents were sharing with you? And the kids would say, they don't trust us. And they went back and forth, and I would do this for usually an hour. And after a while, nobody was ever connecting. And I would say to them, what is missing in this piece? And then I would ask the parents, how do you feel about the things that we're talking about? And the parents would say, I'm angry or I care or I'm sad or whatever. And I say, do you ever say this to your kid? I'm feeling sad. I worry about you. I know that, there's a possibility that things can happen. And how often does a parent really say to a kid that, you know, I and using emotions. See, one of the missing pieces in parent and child connection is being able to show emotions, what parents are feeling. So, for instance, when I say that to them, and then I go back to the kid, if the parent says, I'm frightened for you, and then I go back and I ask the kid, what were you what did you get out of this? What did the parents say to you? And they would say, I'm frightened for you. And I would ask the kids, what did you feel in that exchange? And they would say, my parents cared about me. And that is so critical that when parents are talking to kids, and I'm going to suggest to anybody that's listening on this, I wrote this book called Letters to Jimmy. I probably had a conservatively 100,000 letters from kids over the years. I had filing cabinets filled with this. And Letters to Jimmy is on Amazon. We did it also on audio. You can listen to it on audio. And it's all these kids' letters in all these different topics. For instance, we're talking about suicide tonight. One of the great letters that I had from a kid, it was an affluent school, and this girl said, I didn't realize the difference between death and disappearance. I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. Look up the book. Listen. These are the kids' voices. I did it deliberately because one of the key things that I do that's probably, way different than a lot of the experts do, and I don't see myself as an expert, is I listen to kids. I listen to kids because kids' voices, kids are living in the mire. Roy, they're living in the mire. They're living in crap. And because they know it and they know what's going on, in turn, they should be the voice you reach out to. And I've had parent groups who I've encouraged get together with other parents, bring kids in and ask them questions and get the answers directly from the source, which is the child. Because once you're able to do that, you get the best understanding and you don't guess. You don't throw a dart in a dartboard and try and figure it out and take a chance. You're getting it directly from the source. And I did something unique. I was hired by Zealand schools in Michigan for 3 months. They were having gang problems. They were having drug problems. They were having all kinds of problems. And they had a radio station. And I switched roles. I had the kids be the moderators and the parents call in. So the parents were calling in and the kids were answering the parents in terms of questions. That's how I've worked over my life and have gotten to know and been able to save some lives, lose some lives as well. My career has been not about all just saving lives, because I've done a ton of eulogies, and it's sad to You bleed when you lose somebody. And I was thinking today, because I did a eulogy on St. Patty's Day about a year ago, and it was a 16-year-old girl that had committed herself. She killed herself. And the mom asked me to come and do the eulogy for her. So I did my part of the eulogy. The church was packed, and I went up the lectern and did my part of the eulogy. Now, here's the memory that I will always have. They pushed the casket all the way to the front of the church. And the next person up to do a eulogy was the girl's younger brother. Instead of climbing up the lectern, Roy, he climbed on the top of the casket, and for 15, 20 minutes screamed out to his sister, "Don't leave me. Don't leave me." That burns inside of me, that the parents weren't able to, to help this girl through some of the problems. So when I lose children, it just gets me more resolve to keep fighting at my age for these children, because I want to give them a voice, and they deserve to have a voice. Unfortunately, if you remember living in Florida, the Parkland kids were maligned. All they wanted to do was, they lived under one of the worst situations, was a mass shooting of their friends. And they wanted to change some of this. And this big adult population didn't buy it. They were saying these kids are in it for the publicity or for more money or all the rest of the stuff. And they maligned these kids, and they shut their voices down. There's still some out there from Parkland that are trying to do something, but that's key. You got to listen to your kids.
Sure. So let me ask a quick question. Here's what I think would be kind of interesting, and I want to get your take on this. What if during lunchtime, which is the loneliest time, what if there was a call in for parents and these kids could be the moderators in these departments?
I think it's great. And I think anytime people can think outside the box of how to solve some of these problems is great. And what you're sharing is solutions, because if we're not working at solutions, these kids are still in that mire.
Well, yeah, but you got to understand one thing too, Jim. Like when you start to take a look at the kids, right? The kids are 16 and 14 and 6. They're not fully developed. As parents, it is our job, right? Listen, when you do things in this world, you hear it, you've heard this all over, and it's funny because on social media, everybody wants to follow anybody who's got money. Elon Musk, he can say whatever he wants, and everybody goes, oh, and they follow him. Mark Cuban, all over, and people want to follow because they look, because the money, right? And so these kids, there has to be something of more substance for them that they can get access to, because there's a saying in business, right, that you're always trying to get smarter people around you than you. They tell you whoever you hang around, you will earn within thousands of dollars of the people who you hang around. That's what they tell you, right? And they show you the wealthy people, right? Their kids go to these schools and they go on these kinds of trips, and that's what it is. So it's like we need
Roy, there's a loneliness that exists in today's world, and I've been on this earth a while here, but there's a loneliness that exists in kids, and they're looking for models. They're looking, your family, is together for 60 years. So you got a chance to at least see a marriage that was still together. These kids, I just got a call the other day from a middle school boy who was living on his mom's couch because, they didn't have any money. And every night, a different man came out of his mom's bedroom. A different man every night. Can you imagine what that message is for that boy for the rest of his life in terms of trust? And how tragic it is that his mother put this in his face. And when he talked to me, he said, my mom has no clue how much pain I'm in watching this. I want to protect my mom, but I can't. We are living at this time where we have to look outside the box. We have to find solutions. And kids, it may not be a parent that it gives a solution. In schools, the bus driver or the woman in the lunchroom or the janitor can connect with kids, and many times they're that person that the kids go to.
Sure. And that's why I said earlier, when I said this, and I wasn't being, arrogant about it, I says that I can solve any problem, because what you just said validated what I was saying. The community has to be involved. And when you take a look at it, there's so many lonely people out there. There's a lot of lonely men and women out there, because once they're divorced, right, they go through this whole thing where some of them will, may not meet another partner again in their lifetime. So there's a lot of lonely people that are out there that, can get involved, and they would probably love to get involved.
I try as best I can to take what you're just sharing and to be able in some way, shape, or form to get them involved. But I want you to listen to something. Years ago, I did all the Utica schools. There's probably, 18, 20 Utica schools, including the middle school and the rest of the schools. And they did a drug survey. And there's about 20,000 kids responded to the drug survey. And they asked, kids, about, are you experimenting? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And there was nothing new in terms of what came out of that survey. But there was one question that jumped out at me. And they asked, who would you go for help if you were hurting? Take a guess. Who would these kids go for help if they were hurting?
Since it's unfortunate that I'm assuming that it's not parents, I would be clueless.
Their friends. The parent and the school psychologist were at the bottom of the list. For kids who were juniors and seniors, it was about over 90% that they would go for their friends. Down a little bit, it was in the 80%, they would still go for their friends.
So what we need to do is this. Again.
Oh, by the way, before I forget,
Sure.
And I don't want to lose this thought. The number 2 choice the kids were going to go, if they were hurting, is to an anonymous drug clinic. Parents are so often, because of their, consciousness. I mean, you bring a kid in the world, and then, like this woman is sleeping with all these men, you realize that this is the things that kids give up on. They give up. They because if they're not being understood, if they don't feel like they have a you know a, a part of a family, because most families, they use discipline and everything. And I encourage parents to share your feelings. I'm scared for you. I love you. I don't want anything to happen to you. Those are areas that kids respond to. And I've been doing this a long time, and I listen to when the parents all of a sudden start talking in those terms.
Okay, so what has to happen is that when these kids go to their friends and their friends are there, their friends have to have the ability to say, like with my son and their friends, they would come and say, hey, so and so's this, and say, hey, you know what? Let me talk with him. We all owe it, right? I don't see many people where a child is hurt or hurting and they wouldn't go help. And so, here, if we were leaving a football game and someone was, an adult was picking on a little kid, right? The mob would come out of nowhere to protect that child. The problem is that when you start to talk about emotions and mental, very, very difficult, because most of the times they're hidden, right? People hide their feelings when they're embarrassed of them. And the key is that we have to have this where kids can go to a place where they can just get that little bit of connections, or come over like all the time. These kids would come to our house all the time, but I was not easy on them. I let them have it when they, if they threw, stuff on the yard or made a mess, man, I really would let them have it. And it's funny, my wife would say to me, you can't talk to other people's kids that way. And I would say, well, they're at my house and I'm feeding them. So yeah, I can. And guess what? My son comes home from college. They're all here. Every one of them still comes back.
Because kids want boundaries. They crave boundaries. We don't realize it, and they push our limits, but they want boundaries. I had a kid in California who his parents went away, and they left him in his house for his senior year in high school. And he got up at the mic and he started sharing about the fact how scared he was, that there was no one there when he had no curfew, could do anything he wanted. There was no one there to know that he was safe, know that he was cared for. He had an empty house, and he said openly to the school, I was so scared I slept with a gun underneath my pillow. And here you had his parents that, instead of creating someone to be responsible for their son or just watch out for it, instead, by leaving them alone, their minds go in different directions, and many times it's not healthy. It's not a healthy direction. That when something is spinning in somebody's mind, it's the same around suicide. When a kid takes a look at suicide as an option and it spins in their head 24/7, one of the things I'm working on really hard is to get these kids to look at being, committing to something that would make a difference and feeling good about themselves. Because in feeling good about themselves, something's going to stop in their head for at least a couple of hours. If they go out and they help some people for a couple of hours, and in that stoppage, you may be saving their life because it isn't spinning all the time.
Sure. It's a great point. And that was to my point of there has to be this system that connects everybody. These older people that are lonely can connect with these young kids and they can communicate together. And you know, that's what to me is the only way that this can really work. Because some of the parents, you know, perfect example, that mother with, you know, all the boyfriends, that, you know, and here's one thing kids have to understand too. You know, they think that that defines anything in them, and it doesn't. That kid could have the best marriage, right? When he gets married, he could be the best husband in the world and the most faithful husband in the world because of what he went through. So, you know, kids need to understand that they got to relax. It's going to be okay, right? Don't always worry about all these things. It can still be okay.
I mean, from from your mouth to God's ears, it would be a great planet if that was the case. However, kids these days, and COVID didn't help, were isolated, and the more isolated they were, the more frightened they got, and in that fear was a challenge to not be alone, and yet they were alone, and they knew they were alone. And so often than not, and there's a lot of missing pieces to this whole suicide situation. There are kids who want so much for their parents to be proud of them. I was one of those kids. There are kids that want to succeed, and be able to, have their parents come and say, you did a great job, you're successful, and the rest of the things. However, there's also that balance where kids are trying so hard to please, and they want their parents to just say, I love you. In my house, and I had been Mr. Everything in my high school. In my high school, my parents would have a party, and they would invite you know the parents who came to the party, and they would, when the party started, they would bring me out, and I was like a trophy kid, and they would say, I want to introduce you to my son, the class leader, to my son, the athlete, to my son, the scholar. I just wanted them to introduce me. This is my son, and I love him. And that's all sometimes is needed. But parents feel like I got to brag about my kid because
Oh, 100%. I hear that when I see, you know, it's funny. I have this saying, and I see these people with all these bumper stickers, right? And so, you know, people would put these bumper stickers on, and my son goes, "Oh yeah, the person did this and get a sticker." I go, "Listen, I used to tell all these kids that would come over, to me, you're all idiots until you prove that you're not an idiot, right?" And I said, and it's okay because we're all idiots. We are all idiots at some point in our lifetime. We all fail at some point in our lifetime. We all are a disaster at some point in our lifetime. Every family is dysfunctional.
Can I share something that has been so poignant in my life, that just flipped into my head? A friend of mine invited me to, his son was playing in a championship game in Little League. And I was in Chicago, and I flew in, and it was in Livonia. And I went to the field, and the stands were packed. And I went all the way down to the end of, one of the stands, and I sat down, and I sat next to a man whose son was playing in the outfield. Now, these were young kids, Little League. And he was screaming instructions to his kid. Get back there. When he was up at bat, his dad would say, make contact, hold your bat up, and everything, and all these instructions. And this kid who so much wanted his dad to be proud, he listened to his dad give all these instructions. Winning run on third base. Batter hits a fly ball out to this man's son in center field. He runs in, and the ball drops over him. He misjudged the fly. Parents congratulated their kids, jumped off the bleachers, congratulated their kids. This man took his fists and was smashing on his thighs. He got up, Roy, and this will blow you away. He got up and he walked out. His kid was coming in from center field, his head down, dejected that his error cost his team the game. The man comes within a couple feet of his son, and he calls his son's name out. And he takes his hand, just like I got, that people could see right now. He takes his hand and he smacks his kid across the face.
Wow.
Everybody stopped because the crack was that loud. And his kid started to walk away from him. I wish the kid had cried, had yelled, get angry with his dad, some emotion. And the dad walked out next to his kid and tried to put his arm around his kid, and his kid pulled away. And I went home that night and I thought, I obviously felt for the kid like everybody else is listening now. But I also felt for the dad. The dad was so involved in the kid's prowess and, what the kid did and how many hits and all the rest of stuff, that he didn't stop long enough to say this kid needed a hug from his dad, needed his dad to say, it was okay, I still love you. It just something to that effect. And what I realized was that was a lifetime scar. That kid will always remember that. And I don't care how many great, trips they go on or anything else, or how much a dad lauds on the kid. That memory will always stick.
Yes.
Those are the things that parents have to stop, take a breath, don't get into the mix, and don't, for heaven's sakes, don't put it on your kid.
Listen, 100%. But now let's flip that around. Your father, you had big issues with your father, correct?
I did.
Huge, correct?
I did.
Scarring
that I wanted my father to be proud.
Okay, every kid. But you were scarred, right?
I was scarred, but
okay.
I
so
did
hold on. But even though you were scarred, look at what you have done besides that. You have changed. I mean, think about this. Your dad has not saved as many lives as you have saved. He has not changed as many lives as you have changed. He has not left a legacy impact for people who should not be here, who didn't have children, because I witnessed it. I witnessed a man come with his wife and kids. That legacy will go on forever. Forever. So what you went through with your dad transformed into doing this. So children need to understand and people need to understand it's okay. That kid with the smack across the face, you're right. It's horrific, right? But that kid that will not define his relationship with his dad or himself. And that's what everybody has to understand, that they cannot just take this and absorb it and go, oh, it's so horrifying.
One word transcends this. And it's so hard for people to do. And I'm proudest of what I did with this. I've a lot of, I've had a lot of successes and a lot of failures. I'm the proudest of this. I chose consciously and went after it to forgive my mother and father, because a lot of times, and you're right, you're spot on. A lot of times as we grow up, you got to stop blaming your parents for your issues. You got to step up and take responsibility for your issues. And I had, epiphany moments when I was forgiving. I was one of the Detroit News Michiganians, big award. And I called my dad up, and my dad had never been to anything that I got in terms of awards. And I've been very fortunate. I've had the highest awards in every area of my life, and my dad has never been there. And he never came when I played sports, and he never showed up. He was a businessman. And in his eyes, that was more important. And so I was one of the Detroit, News Michiganians. Call my father up. He lives in California. And he says, I asked him, he said, no, it's too far. I'm I don't know whether I'll be able to make the trip and everything. And I kind of prepared myself because I knew that was going to be coming. Anyway, I sent him a big article in the Detroit News that, about the award and everything. And I called him up one day, and he said, he called me up and he said, I'm coming. I want to come to the award ceremony. Well, he came in, and I took him around with all my friends. And he was saying to my friends who never met him, but I'd heard about him, he would say to my friends, I wish my son had gone into business with me. All this service stuff and working with kids and all the rest of the stuff, it's not that important. And my dad used to say to me all the time, anything I did for others was not going to get a good payback in my life. So I had to listen to that stuff. And he would call me every Saturday morning and tell me. So I was the last to speak at alphabetically at this dinner. And I was in Shamshuda Company that night. Jack Smith, the CEO of General Motors, Emmanuel Stewart, the boxer, Sheila Tormina, the Olympian, the head of Motown was Barry Gordy was in the mix. So I get up to the mic. I'm the last to speak alphabetically. And I get up and the first words out of my mouth is, Dad, I know you didn't want me to pursue what I pursued. I know that, you weren't proud of me of what I've done, and that you wanted me to be more like you and my brother Robert. My brother Robert's a multimillionaire, and he wanted this. And he was standing there with a cane and standing up. But I said to him, I'm the richest person here tonight. My father's here, and you're here, and I'm so happy that you're here. And I kept on going, Roy, and I got to the end of my talk, and I don't know what possessed me, but I said to him, and Pop, I'm going to keep trying harder, and one day you'll be proud of me. I look out over him, and he was starting to cry. My father never cried, even at my grandfather's funeral. And I went over and I put my arms around him, and he was sobbing on the side of my chest. And I was holding him. Do you know, I was 60 years old. Do you know that was the first time in my whole life that I knew he was proud? And he went home, and 2 weeks later, on Father's Day, he died. But I had gotten that closure. I had gotten that moment that I cried out for. And it was so special. And then I went on to my mother, who was her biggest, fault by my mom is that she had false pride. So when someone would cross her, they died. They died. They could be, 6 inches from each one's face, but my mom would never talk to them. And so my mom and my brother had an angry fight over smoking in his house in Boston. And for 47 years, they never talked. And I ran back and forth as the emissary, trying to bring them together. And I don't want to get into this lengthy story, but my mom, I had to work twice as hard to forgive my mom, because my mom was such a hard ass and didn't, she didn't, accept anything.
Okay, so let me ask you a quick question. Dad's really a lot of work. Mom's a lot of work, right?
Yes.
Very difficult. How much do you love them right now?
More than I could even share.
So the point that I'm trying to make to everybody, that mother with those men coming out of the room, the son still loves her more than anything. The parents, there's no perfect parent. It is not easy. I am a parent of 3 kids, and I can tell you right now, my wife said to me one time, she says, your son is going to hate you one day, because we would argue every day, okay? Me and my wife would go work out every day, and my son would never work out ever, ever, ever. And now he works out all the time, and now we have the best relationship ever, because I wasn't pushing my son for the physical side of it. It was more of exercising as a mental and a physical, right? There's benefits to it. And it's like, that's just what I believe. Now, I when my son played sports, he was out there and they were playing the games. I never cheered. I never did anything. I was excited and I was happy. And the parents would say, why aren't you cheering and screaming? Because I want my son to enjoy it. And all I would say to my son at the end of the games were, did you have a great time? Win or lose, I don't care what my children do. Are you enjoying the ride? That's the only thing that matters to me.
If there were more parents that would use that, concept, we would be in a better place in terms of less deaths, less suicide, less, but a lot of parents are not, as I said, it didn't come with an owner's manual. There's no blame of parents, but at some point, what young people want and what children want is they want to know that they have a place in the family, and they want to know, equally important, that the parents really, really love them unconditionally. And that is a hard thing for parents, because
it's very difficult.
I mean, I used to ask parents, do you know what a rave party is? You know what a rave party is, right?
Yes.
And I used to ask parents about a rave party. Probably only 20% of the parents that I ever asked knew what a rave party was. And it's been going on for, years and years and years. And I went underground to 2 rave parties. and and I disguised myself. Obviously, an old man going to a rave party is, absurd. So I disguised myself. But I was in this rave party, and there was every imaginable thing that a parent would go crazy, if they knew that their child was doing this. So a girl comes out, and this was, in an urban area, and the rave party was in a building, and a girl comes out, and she's leaning against the building, and she calls her mom, and she says, "Mom, I'm at the mall with such and such, and I'll be home later." And then she goes in and proceeds to, get stoned and, have sex and all the rest of the things. And the parents would be so mortified if they knew what was going on. Well, kids are great at masking. They do this. So the parents ultimately still have to know where their kids are and what their kids are doing without, being so, on top of them that the kids feel suffocated, but that the parents know. And the parents, the best thing a parent can do is saying, I'm frightened for you because I love you. I want you to understand that. And when a kid knows that, that's powerful.
Yeah, but the parents did it too. The parents did the same thing.
That's why the parents don't trust the kids.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that everybody has to understand one thing. This whole life is just a shit show for everybody. It just is. And that's what everybody has to understand, that it's the greatest shit show in the world, and enjoy it. Be safe. Be smart, right? Bad things are going to happen and great things are going to happen. The difference is you want to be.
I wish today so many people, and I've never seen it quite like this. I mean, I was a rebel, and I was a high risk adventurer, and I tried every high risk sport that there was, and didn't care because, I didn't have a sense of purpose and everything. But people are scared today, and they're scared, and there's so much going on to create that fear. And the fear emanates into their families, and the fear emanates into their lives. And it would be great if people could step back and take your concepts and embrace them and put them into their life. But the fear is so phenomenal. And the fear, I was talking to somebody yesterday who went to the movies, and there was, maybe, 4 or 5 people in the movie. But anyway, they looked around, even with the 4 or 5 people, to see if there was anybody there that looked suspicious. We have had these things, and that came out of, the movie, where, the gunman came into the movie and killed about 11 people in Colorado. We are living with this, and it takes more people to be creative in looking at solutions and still trying to get the results that they're hoping for. And a lot of times it's unconditional love and acceptance that we all want on some level, and hopefully a parent can do that for us. In my mother's case that I'm just talking to you, I started something in my keynotes. I asked my audience to raise their hand if they can remember their most painful moment, and hands shut up like it was happened yesterday. And I said, how long ago? And so many people said, they knew down to the day and even maybe the hour of where that painful moment came from. And one guy said 72 years and 3 months and 2 days when I asked. So you can imagine how this lives inside of all of us, this painful moment. And what we have to do is somehow we have to challenge that painful moment, because that's why I use this exercise. In my particular case, my mother never paid attention to me. And I was 10 years old. And I was in my room. And my mom would always watch television in another room, in one of these old televisions where you turn the knob and the light went around to the station. I remember that so vividly. And I wanted my mother to notice me. And that's what kids want. I wanted my mother to notice me. So I took off my belt, Roy, and I started smacking myself, on my stomach. And after a while, my stomach was bleeding, but I kept on smacking myself. And I screamed out on several occasions. And my mother never came in. Can you imagine that mark of that time of wanting something, of loving from your parent? So parents, have to be able to look beyond what the box says and create solutions. And there are creative parents all the time. And I see them on so many occasions. And I congratulate them. And I feel good about what they're doing. And I feel like their kids are going to grow up and be healthier kids and create their own, their own marriages and their own families and be healthier, because the parent made them feel safer. And that is such an essential point today, is that when people don't feel safe, they're afraid. And when they're afraid, they're angry. When they're angry, they take it out on people.
But see, that's a sense of community, though. That's the one thing that, everybody has to understand. It isn't just about the fact of you feeling a sense of security with your parents, because sometimes they don't know, right? Sometimes parents are going through a lot of stuff, right? Dad with the bills, mom with this. There's a lot of moving parts for parents. There just is. Being
Tremendous.
A parent, it is the most stressful thing you can ever be, is being a parent. And so, the one thing is there's two things that I look at. One is kids have got to be a little bit tougher, right? Have a little thicker skin. Number two, you're right. The parents have to pay more attention to that part of their children. But also the third component is the part that's really going to be the asset, is the community. Listen, when you go to Birmingham and you go to see a movie in downtown Birmingham, and you're going, you walk around and you know that you feel safe because you're in a safe environment because of the community that you're in. It's the community. And that's
it used to be with all of, we have set beyond records. I think last year, 800 mass shootings. Now think about it. The mass shootings occurred in grocery stores. They occurred in all different venues, all different types of situations. But there's one theme that I'm trying to get people to understand, and I'm going to do it and fight to it before my time is up. One of the key things that we're all looking for, everybody wants to find the motive of the shooter. What we need to look for is how do we identify the shooter before they do damage? How do we anticipate and be understanding? And it's always most of the theme of the shooters is they're isolated.
100%.
They're not accepted.
Yep.
They're not cared for in their families, in their communities, in their churches and synagogues, in their schools. they're not, and schools, by the way, they're bully pulpits, beyond your comprehension. And kids get, destroyed in school situations. I was in a worldwide movie called A Girl Like Her. Anybody that's listening, it's worth your time. It was number one on Netflix for 6 years. And it went all over the world and had millions of views. And it was a kids kind of movie that they wanted to see. It was a favorite with kids, but it was all about bullying. And the opening scene to it was a girl who was overdosing. And the rest of the movie tracked as to why she overdosed. But what was fascinating about this movie was that they had the segments of how it happened. The parents were bullies of this one girl in school who was the most popular. She gathered around 3 other friends, and they became bullies. And they were the high and mighty in the school. Half of it was shot at Seaholm High School, half of it in Hollywood. It's a movie that is absolutely worthwhile for people to see.
Okay, so Jimmy, let's end with this. We have some work to do from our end, because what we need to do is we need to have a platform that allows people to come in, because like you said, those whatever mass shooting people, it is like you said, it's not about identifying who they are, because you don't know the internal issues that they have going through, right? Everybody has them, and it's, the brain is complex and nobody's the same. What we need to do is we need to have an outreach where they can find other people like themselves to reach out, okay, or people that can help them, because then when they realize that they're not alone, then people are happy. And people need people, right? We need people.
We're going back to the word safe, because you're spot on target. When we are sharing with people of like mind, when we have created a community, people feel like people are watching out over them. Yeah. When we look at, I'm doing a kindness community in the Detroit metropolitan area now, where we went to the city council, and we pitched them, my team pitched them to do a climate in their community that was all about kindness and all about caring. And I wanted optimally for people to know that somebody cared, and not that they were, that they were alone, and that they had to feign for themselves, that because of the community allegiance, and everybody joined this. I mean, it's amazing. We've been doing this 9 months, and everybody has come together. All the businesses have come together about kindness. All the churches and the synagogues and the schools and the service clubs, and everybody came together as a unit. There's 20,000 residents in that. And I'm going to build a model with that, and then create a model and take it all over the country so that other communities can do this. But this is what you've been talking about, which is wanting to feel safe. And if you're not feeling safe, then you just pull back.
Well, yeah.
And you become isolated.
Yes.
And that is a big reason why we haven't figured out the mass shootings, because these people are isolated.
But don't they have to be safe and connected? Don't they need both?
Being safe includes connection.
Okay, fair enough. Perfect. So let's end this, and then let's figure out what we need to do. How we can grab. I know what we need to do. We need to start reaching out to different groups that we can start to bring in and start to build a movement. And the movement is having connection and people that people who need help can reach out to and connect with.
It's during COVID, because my mind is always on what can I do creatively. I started this program called Connections. And what it was I knew that there were isolated people out there. And I wanted to reach out to people I hadn't talked to in 20, 30, 40 years. And I started doing it, Roy. And I encourage them, if I call you, then you call somebody else and look in on them. And you get, at its heyday, hundreds of people around the country were calling each other to check in because so many of these people were intimidated and afraid to go out if something happened. And so many times it's the elderly that really are the shut-ins, and they just close the door. And I'll leave you with, something that, will shake people up, but at least understand that that this exists. There was a woman, her name was Mrs. Levy. When I was 10 years old, I lived in an apartment building in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And Mrs. Levy lived on my floor. And every time I would see her in the elevator, she would invite me into her house, for Oreo cookies and milk. And I just love this woman. And I lost track of her for about a month or two. And I was coming back from school, and the superintendent was coming out of his office next to the elevator. And I asked the super, "Have you seen Mrs. Levy?" And he said, "Jim, didn't you know Mrs. Levy died?" And I said, "Died? What are you talking about?" And this is what he said, and it stuck with me in my life. He said, "We don't know how she died. We didn't find her body until her rent was 2 months overdue." Can you imagine being that alone, that the only connection you have in the world is your rent request? She was so isolated. And I realized, because growing up in New York is one of the loneliest cities on the planet. I mean, I loved it, but it was lonely. And people were isolating themselves. These days, we need connectedness. We need connections. We need to know that we could call Roy Gonzalez and he will care about us.
But it needs to be connection with a purpose. You're right. It can't just be connection with a purpose.
Connection with a purpose. Absolutely.
All right. We're going to start working on it, Jimmy. We'll get set for next week and we'll have our next topic up. But in the meantime, we're going to start to work on those items. And then you can send me the information on the gentleman with the app so we can start connecting as that part of, that piece into it as well.
Happy to do that. Thanks for the opportunity. Anyone who's listening in, it's not, I get up every day with hope. I get up every day with knowing that people are genuinely good, and I want to keep fighting for that and keeping it going. And within my last breath, and I watched the other night something that made me cry. I was watching David Muir, and a woman from the Albert Einstein School of Medicine in Manhattan. This woman was a doctor, and her husband had left her some money, and she was speaking to a big crowd of students in an auditorium. And she finished up and she said, "My husband left me a lot of money. I'm going to make sure that none of you," and there were probably 900,000 students, "that none of you ever has to pay another penny of your medical tuition at school. I'm going to pay for it." And She did. She is. She's willing. Can you imagine what a beautiful gesture that is, Roy, to give hope and to so many, and to be able to leave her legacy by being able to care about people. That's the key. And everybody's capable of doing it. And sometimes it's really simple. You just have to look around in your space, because there's always someone in need and there's always some challenges.
Well, we're going to build this around you. This is going to be your legacy. This is going to be your app that's going to connect people around the world, not just for showing social media, but for showing people who really care, who need help, who want to reach out and connect with somebody, who are in pain or who are suffering, and those who aren't, that just want to help. And that's
there's so many people who want to help, don't know where to go.
Well, that's what we're going to have set up for them. So I appreciate everything, Jim. Love you. And
love you, Roy. And thank you for what you're doing here. And hopefully the people who are listening, pay it forward. Keep it moving. Whatever gem you got out of tonight, pay it forward. And that will give the ripple effect, that we throw a stone in the lake and we watch how those ripples keep going and going and going.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. Have a great night. Tell Jan thank you for help setting this up, and we will be talking again really soon.
Thank you, Roy, for caring enough about to do this. Okay?
Take care, buddy.
You too.